Okay, now what we have done account receivable. Now we're going to start inventory. This topic has been divided into three areas. First, you will discuss basics of inventory, inventory fundamentals. In the second topic, you will do LIFO, FIFO, average cost method, and the specific identification method. And the last one is the most important one. In this area, you will see if the value of the inventory falls after the initial recognition, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to recognize loss and by what amount? So this is a very important one. And as I said, that these three topics are highly examinable. You will have a couple of questions from these topics. So starting first with the basic one, inventory fundamentals. So let's see what do we have here. Inventory fundamentals. First, we'll discuss some basics of inventory, some inventory recording methods. What would be the effect if the inventory is overstated or understated? So this is what we're going to discuss. So why do we hold inventory? Why? So that we can have sufficient quantities when available so that we can meet the needs of our customers. And we do not want to overstock. This is the reason why we should have stock. Ji, walaikum assalam, Yusuf. But we should not have too much stock, because if you carry too much stock, it will involve a lot of carrying cost. Carrying cost is the cost incurred when you hold inventory in your warehouse. It involves rent of your warehouse. It involves salaries of the staff who protect the stock for you. It involves damage of the material while it's in the warehouse. This is called obsolescence. And of course, you have to get your stock insured. So all these costs involving the cost of carrying the inventory in the warehouse is called the carrying cost. We'll discuss this in detail as we go along. So these are the reasons. So the point to learn here, that your stock should neither be too high that it results in a lot of carrying costs, nor should it be too less that we may not be able to meet the needs of our customer. So you need to balance. Now, what do we understand by the term inventory? First of all, inventory can be of four types. When we say merchandise inventory, this is inventory with a retailer, goods which are ready to be sold. So this inventory is merchandise inventory. This is found with the retailers. But in the manufacturing company, you will have three types of stocks. The raw material, which is used in production. When the work is started on certain units, some units remain unfinished. These units are called the work in process. And those units which are totally completed with regard to the customer utility, they are called the finished goods. So the merchandise inventory specifically for the retailer, and rest of these three are for the manufacturer: raw material, work in process, and finished goods. So just a little description: the inventory are tangible items which you can touch. Of course, they are either held for sale if you are a merchandiser or if you are a retailer, or they are used to produce further goods and services if you are a manufacturer. So this is the basic idea. Now, the question that you might be tested on: what is included in the cost of inventory? So let me tell you what is added in the cost of your inventory. When you purchase your inventory, first thing that you consider is the invoice price, the amount that you have to pay to a supplier. Then inventory won't come to your warehouse by just flying. It has to be transported in. It has to be transported in through maybe marine ways, or maybe by air, or some other means. So the amount that you pay to bring your inventory to your production facility is called freight, and sometimes it's called carriage inwards. It is added to the purchase price. Once the goods are received in your warehouse, you need to inspect them for quality before this material is issued for production. This cost will become the part of your production of your material. And then finally, you incur what you call the manufacturing cost. That includes your direct labor, that includes your variable overheads, electricity, gas, water, indirect material, indirect labor, and then finally your fixed overheads. That includes your rent, insurance of the premises, insurance of machinery, property taxes, salary of the plant managers, plant supervisor, and all the fixed costs. And these are all costs that you call the preparation cost, that will convert your raw material into finished goods. We have already discussed this in our previous topic. Now, this is a good question here. An entity had the following account balances in the pre-closing trial balance. What exactly is required, so that we can just extract the right information from this data given. Yes, absolutely, Subhan. In case of absorption costing, fixed cost becomes the part of your cost of production. Remember, we are doing the US GAAP. Under the US GAAP, only method allowed is absorption method. Fixed cost must be made as a part of product. So what we need to calculate the net purchase. So for that, we need to see how many goods did we buy. This is the figure for purchase. This is the transportation in cost, which you call the freight. Then there were some purchase discounts to be deducted, some allowances given by the supplier to be deducted, and then some goods which were not up to our specification or up to our requirement, we just simply returned them. So if we just add all these, Fahad says B and it has to be B, then B is the right answer. So this is what is considered while you account for the material for production purposes. Now, as I said, that merchandiser is in fact the retailer who simply purchases ready-made goods and just simply holds them for some time and then sell it to the customer. So merchandiser will purchase and he will hold it for some time, and after that, when these goods are sold, they become the part of the cost of goods sold. But in case of manufacture, things are a little longer in process. Let me show you how the mechanism works. Manufacturer will bring in the raw material through purchases. He will add in direct labor and factory overhead, which we know are of two types, fixed and variable. Once these costs are incurred, this raw material is converted into either the work in process, which means these are the partly finished goods, or it will be completed in the form of finished goods. Now remember, that part of the finished goods inventory which is sold during the period, it becomes a cost. Your inventory is an asset. Your finished goods inventory is an asset. Your work in process inventory is an asset. Your raw material inventory is an asset. But these finished goods which we sell, they are our asset. But when they are sold, they become cost of sales or cost of goods sold. And this cost of goods sold is then compared with the sales number in order to determine how much gross profit we have generated. So this is the concept which we have learned in the previous income statement. These are some important arrangements. Now, sometimes you are required to find out goods available for sale. What basically this means. Let's say you had goods costing $10,000 during the period. At the start of the period, what you call the beginning inventory. During the period, you purchased goods worth $90,000. So you had 10,000 goods with you. You purchased 90,000, which means the goods available for sale were $100,000. This is called the goods available for sale, right? Now, not all of them will be sold. Out of these, the goods that have been sold, their cost is, let's say, $70,000. This $70,000 is the cost of the goods that have been sold. That's why it's called cost of goods sold. And the item that we couldn't sell, they will be showing up in the ending inventory balance at $30,000. So remember, sometimes you are required to find the goods available for sale. It is very simple. Simply take the beginning inventory and to that add your net purchase. Yes, you can find this way as well. So this is the way you can find goods available for sale is simply equal to beginning inventory plus purchase, or you can also calculate goods available for sale using this arrangement, one way or the other. You can just take one item on the other side. Let me explain this so that you don't get confused. So this is what we have just discussed, beginning inventory plus purchase. This is the goods available for sale. Sometimes beginning inventory is missing. Sometimes purchases are missing also. What you are given cost of goods sold and you are given ending inventory. So using this arrangement, it's a simple arithmetic. So you can just take one side on the other and you can find this as well. As you can see here, the cost of goods sold is calculated from goods available for sale. So basically goods available for sale, we just discussed, this is $100,000, which is split into two parts. The goods that are sold and goods that are unsold. So if you make an equation of these, you can write goods available for sale is equal to ending inventory plus cost of goods sold. And using this, you can find whatever is unknown in this situation, right? So this is the same arrangement here. Now, there are two methods of accounting for inventory. One is the perpetual system, other you will discuss in the later slides as the periodic system. The meaning of perpetual is forever. That is a literal meaning here. But the way we use it in figurative sense, perpetual means the inventory record that is always updated. Every purchase every sale, yes, it updates your records. So perpetual system provides up-to-date inventory records. Every sale and purchase will revise your inventory balances. So many stores that you see that have point of sale terminal, any purchase and sale is automatically deducted, and inventory on your records will be the inventory that are physically available. So this method is quite prevalent. Mostly it's used by FMCG corporations that have lots of inventory. So to this alternative system we have, which is, I don't recommend, it's a very outdated system. It is called the periodic system. Like, let us first discuss what is perpetual. Under the perpetual system, it's an example from your book. Every sale, every purchase updates your inventory records. If you sell something, your inventory is reduced. If you buy something, your inventory is increased. So by the time when the period is over, the quarter or the year, since your records are continuously updated, you don't have to physically count as such. Your numbers are available. You can calculate your gross profit. So simply every transaction of sale, every transaction of purchase will update your inventory records, right? So no journal entry is needed for inventory, because inventory is always updated on every sale and every purchase. Take this some time to see this example. This is the idea how you don't have to go for entries for perpetual or periodic. You just need to understand the concept that under the perpetual, every sale, every purchase will revise your inventory numbers. And at the end, you don't have to enter any inventory transaction. The number on your records should match with the inventory available in the physical warehouse. But under the periodic system, what we do, we keep on entering sales, we keep on entering purchase. And at the end of the period, we conduct a physical count. We conduct a physical count, and at this physical count, we come to know that what is the value of the goods that we have available. Like, let's say, I will take some imaginary numbers. Let's say at the end of the period, you calculated your inventory value to be $70,000, right? Now, this $70,000 is the goods available at the end of the period, finished goods, right? I want to now find out what is the cost of sales. Now, the goods that I've sold during the period, they are worth $100,000. This is sales. This is your closing stock inventory with you at the moment. Then you will have the detail regarding opening stock. You will have the detail regarding the purchase during the period. So let's say the opening stock was 10,000. The purchase made was 20,000, let's say. It can't be 20,000. You have closing stock. So let's take it's 120,000, right? So 10,000 opening stock, 120,000 purchase. So the total goods available for sale were 130,000. Out of this, still we have 70,000 goods available through the physical count. So the difference between these will be your cost of goods sold, which I believe would be $160,000. So this clearly shows that there is a loss. Just let's take this $200,000. So the point I want to make is that under the physical method, you count your inventory physically, and this is taken as an input to calculate your CGS. Okay, 60,000. Fine, 60,000. And then, of course, there will be profit of 40,000. Remember, under the physical method, you physically count your inventory at the end of the period, and that is used to calculate your CGS. Whereas in the perpetual method, your CGS is calculated after every transaction. So profit and loss can be determined for every transaction, whereas in the periodic, you just come to know how much profit or loss you have incurred at the end of the period. You can see the numbers that are given in the example. So the bottom line of this is given right here, which you must put in your head. The perpetual and periodic system have the same result if nothing has been stolen, if nothing has been destroyed during the period. However, the difference is that under periodic system, the amounts of inventory and cost of goods sold are updated at the end of the period by a physical count, whereas in the perpetual system, you will always have the updated numbers for you. So now, the next point here for you is, what about the goods in transit? Let's say I have ordered certain items from Japan, and these items are on their way to my warehouse, and let's say the purchase price inclusive of freight and custom duty together, it's a total of $140,000. Let's see. Now, the seller in Japan is the person A, and I am the buyer B. Now, the goods are in transit. They are maybe on their way through on a ship headed to my country. Now, who is the owner? Who should account for these goods as his inventory. Should A be considering his inventory $140,000? Should I be considering this as my inventory? So remember, when goods are purchased in an international context, there are certain terms that are agreed before the sale transaction occurs. Inventory in transit, exactly. Goods in transit or inventory in transit. So who owns this inventory? Who should report this inventory on its balance sheet? So there are two important terms in the international trade. There are many terms, but we must be focusing only on what is specifically mentioned in our LOS. If the terms of trades are FOB shipping, FOB shipping means as soon as A ships the goods for the onward delivery, the ownership is transferred. Now the owner is B. FOB shipping means when the goods are shipped at shipment point, the ownership transfers from A to B. But if the terms of trade are FOB destination, so that would mean that goods, while they are in transit, they will be the property of the seller, and the ownership will only transfer, yes, Nabil, ownership will only transfer to B when they are received by B. So just two concepts you need to remember. FOB shipping means the ownership transfers when the goods are shipped. A becomes seller and the goods are now the property of B. So when they are in transit, B should report it as his inventory. But when the goods are shipped with FOB destination, so while they are in transit, A should report these as his inventory, and the ownership will only transfer when they are received by B. FOB destination received where the master of the ship, when we send goods in an international context, we are when we are handing over the goods to the shipping company, at that point we give the destination where these goods are to be delivered, right? So when the goods are delivered at that particular point, maybe Karachi dock or wherever, so at that destination point, the ownership transfers from the seller to the buyer. Now let's see a question that covers this specific point only. This is given right here: FOB shipping and FOB destination, where the legal transfer title is transferred, that I've explained it to you. I will explain this later. Goods on consignment, who owns it? A physical inventory count showed an entity had an inventory costing $1 million on hand at the end of the year. This is the physical count. $1 million is inventory available at our warehouse. What are excluded? Excluded from this amount were the following: this and this. Now we have to see whether they should have been excluded or they should have been added in the cost of inventory. Now look, goods costing $82,000 shipped to a customer FOB shipping point on December 28th. That is about 3 days before the closing date. They were expected to be received by the customer on 4th of January. Now, since the shipping term was FOB destination of shipping point, as soon as I ship the goods on 20th of February or 28th of December, goods are no longer my property, so they are rightly excluded. They are rightly excluded because they must not be the part of my inventory, because FOB shipping means they are now the property of the buyer before the balance sheet date. So they are perfect. This is the right treatment. But look at this. Goods costing $122,000 shipped to a customer, free on board, FOB destination. And you have to pay specific attention on the dates. So FOB destination, and they were shipped on 30th of December, year one. And they will be received by the customer when? On 5th of January. It means by 31st of December, they were still in transit. The ownership will only transfer when the goods are received by the customer. Since the goods will be received by 5th of January, so till 5th of January, it is my property. So these goods must be included in my valuation. Right? So, okay, I got it, Talha. Yes, Fahad, you're right. See, so it's basically 1 million plus 122. So it's going to be 1122. So this is the right answer. So your inventory should include 1.122. This 122,000 should be included. Now there is one fine point to learn here regarding inventory. Sometimes we send or deliver some goods to an agent who sells goods on behalf. Let's say Fahad is my agent in UAE, right? I deliver some goods to him. D. Subhan says D. Why? Subhan, these $82,000 worth of goods, since they were sold based upon FOB shipping point, it means as soon as as soon as the goods are shipped, they are not my property. As soon as goods are shipped, they are not my property. And when did I ship these goods? Subhan, I shipped these goods on 28th. So when these goods are shipped, they are not my property, so they are rightly excluded. So that's why I should not include this back again. But this one, since it's an FOB destination and they will be received by the customer on 5th, so that is the reason they are my property, because they are FOB destination. So till 5th, they are mine. All right. So moving on to what we were doing. Let's say Fahad is my agent in UAE and he receives my goods on my behalf and he sells them to the customer on a certain commission percentage basis. So when I send goods to Fahad, I am the consigner who consigns goods, and Fahad is consigning. Right? So, well, what will happen? Let's say I've sold $100,000, or not sold, basically. I've transferred $100,000 worth of goods to Fahad, and it cost me, let's say, $3,000 to transport goods to Fahad's warehouse. Remember, Fahad is consignee who sells goods on my behalf on a certain percentage basis. Now, I have my business in Pakistan, and if I'm valuing my inventory, these goods are with Fahad and they are not yet sold, and I had to pay $3,000 in transportation. So let's say when I'm calculating the inventory valuation for my financial statements, I must add this $100,000 goods with Fahad, plus I must add the transportation costs I had to pay to deliver these goods to Fahad. So my inventory, let's say if my inventory at my warehouse is $500,000, I must add this $100,000 goods with the Fahad, and I must also add this $3,000 here. So my total valuation would be $603,000. So remember, the goods on consignment are yours, and any transportation cost you paid, this will be considered as the cost of your goods and must be added as such. Just I've given the numbers. All right. So what we have next, I think a question. This one. DEF is consignee. Consider it's Fahad. For 1,000 units of product for X, ABC company is the consigner who has delivered these goods to DEF. So ABC is the consigner. That's me, for example. Now, Fahad is the consignee who has 1,000 units of product X, and he holds them for me as ABC company or Asif. ABC should recognize revenue from these 1,000 units when the agreement between DEF and ABC signed. That is the agreement. No, not the agreement date. ABC ships the goods. No, even when the goods are shipped, they are mine. They are consigner's goods. DEF receives the goods. No, when DEF sells the goods, absolutely all of you are right, and informs ABC that the goods have been sold, only then the sale must be recognized. Till that point, yes, when the consignee sells and he lets the seller know that the goods have been sold, only then he should record it as a sale. So that makes D to be the correct option. Now, some important points you need to learn about the cost that you should include in your inventory. Very important points, please note. What is included in the acquisition? We have already discussed that. Let us just have a finer understanding of this concept. The first thing is added is the acquisition price. The price you paid to acquire the material, that includes the freight, that includes the custom duties, handling, everything. When the goods are delivered to your warehouse, you add direct material to it, direct labor to it to convert this into finished goods. Then during the production process, some units are spoiled, and that's a normal practice. Like 5% of the material or 5% of the input is wasted. That is the historical average. This has been happening for the last many years. This is expected. This is called the normal spoilage, the loss that occurs in the normal operations of business. It is included as a part of our production cost. Then the variable overheads of factory, electricity, gas, water, it is included as a cost of production. Then the fixed cost in the factory, rent, insurance, depreciation of plant and machinery, it is included. And remember, this is a very fine point. Warehousing of the raw material or work in process, where you keep your raw materials and where you keep your work in process. Since the goods are not yet complete, any cost for warehousing of raw material, warehousing of work in process, it is considered as a part of your production cost, and it is included in the cost of product. But when the goods are ready, 100% Mia fi Mia, they are perfectly ready to be sold. Now, any cost we pay for warehousing is not a cost of production. Goods are completed. Goods are now completed, ready to be used. Now, if you're spending some money on storage, this is not a cost that you can add to the cost of production. So the warehousing and of finished goods, it is not a part of your product cost. Similarly, cost of selling, Ms. Mansi, is also not a part of your product cost. The cost of production is only up to the boundary of your production facility. Let's say this is the boundary. Look at this. See holistically. Material comes in your warehouse, factory. Material labor works, factory. Normal spoilage occurs, factory. Variable electricity, gas, water, factory. Fixed factory overhead, factory. Warehousing of raw material, factory. Kullu has a factory. Everything relates to factories. That is why all these costs are included in the cost of products. Yes, absolutely. You got it right. Okay, that was your comment. Since there's a cost of selling, you are absolutely right. If this is the goods for warehousing for the finished goods, so this is clearly a selling cost, and that is the very reason it's not a part of product. You are right. So admin and selling cost, not a part of product. And now, abnormal spoilage, which is the result of your inefficiency, your maybe machines were damaged, or maybe the laborers were not well trained. So such a cost of spoilage, the lost units, they cannot be considered as a part of product cost. Hence, the abnormal spoilage is excluded. This is what we discussed in our cost management section D. Those of you who have just joined us, you people will be doing section D, and it involves a detailed understanding of how do we treat the abnormal spoilage or normal spoilage. Right now, remember, normal spoilage is a product cost. Abnormal spoilage is excluded from production cost. It is treated separately as a loss for the period. Now, this is something very, very, very important, because sometimes you have to answer questions involving understanding of this this table. I am going to draw out my own working rather than confusing you with this. I'm going to give you a better representation of how it can be done. Okay. Now listen to me and follow what I'm going to do. Let's say your closing stock at the end of the period, while we were conducting the physical count. Gentlemen, I need your very, very close attention. This is a very important area of your inventory management. During the physical count, we made an error, and our closing stock, by error, it was overstated. By mistake, maybe, or maybe deliberately. If the closing stock is overstated, remember, closing stock is deducted from cost of goods sold. So when your closing stock is overstated, your cost of goods sold, I'm going to write it CGS, it will be understated, because you are deducting a bigger part of closing stock from CGS. So your CGS will shrink. This lowered CGS will result in a higher gross profit. This higher gross profit will feed into a artificially higher net income. And this artificially higher net income will result in higher retained earning. You need to note this down, take a snapshot. And if you go in the other way, closing stock, if by mistake it is understated, maybe some calculation, some counting error. So because closing stock is understated, you are going to deduct a smaller amount. You are going to deduct a smaller amount. Let's say just Hamad, let's say it's just happened during the current period at the end of the year. So the closing stock is understated. What would it mean? It means you are deducting a smaller amount from CGS. Your CGS is going to be overstated. This overstated CGS will depress your gross profits. It will depress your net income, and it will also depress your retained earnings. Hamad, eventually, whatever you earn at the end of the period, Hamad, it goes into retained earnings. So net income eventually goes to retained earnings, right? So from this point of view, so I'm not saying that's retained earning from the previous period. It's just that the net income, which was overstated, its impact will be that retained earning will be overstated. All right. Now the point to learn. This was, let's say, on 31st of December 2021. Now the same error will move to the next period, where on, let's say, 1st of January 2021, and the year ends at 2022, and the year ends at 31st of December 2022. Now, please, gentlemen, follow what I'm telling you. Last year closing stock is going to be this year's opening stock. So if the last year closing stock was overstated. This year's opening stock was overstated because the same numbers, closing stock last year at 31st of December 2021 will be the opening stock for January 1st, 2022. So a higher opening stock means a bigger figure will be added in the CGS. So your CGS will be higher because opening stock is an addition to CGS. A higher CGS for the period will means your gross profit will be depressed, lower, your net income would be lowered. And this is the point here. Since you made a mistake of overstating retained earning by 10,000 last year, for example, but this year reversal will take place. Last year, net income was overstated, retained earning was overstated. But this year, because of this mistake that was carried forward from the previous year, your net income, which was overstated and which resulted in an overstatement of retained earning, your retained earning will now be perfectly okay. They will be perfectly okay because the overstatement last period of $10,000 has been offset by an understatement of $10,000 in the current year. So retained earning is now perfect. Keep that in mind. Similarly, if your closing stock was understated at the end of the last year, which means your opening stock will be understated. A lower opening stock means you have a small number to add in CGS. Your CGS will be lower. A lower CGS means your gross profit would be higher. A higher gross profit means your net income would be higher. And eventually your retained earning should be higher. But since your retained earning was understated last year, this year's overstatement of net income by the same amount means your retained earning is now perfectly okay. Please take a snapshot. This will be very helpful for you to solve many computational and theoretical questions asking you what if the closing stock is overstated, how would it affect GP, how would it affect retained earning next year. Please take a snapshot and share it in our WhatsApp group, or take a snapshot and keep it with you. It will be helpful to answer many questions that are going to come in the next slides. Done? All right. So that's the table, and I think this will be little confusing, and this will make much more sense because they are in logical flow. So you can memorize this and you can make full understanding out of it. Now let us try a question and see how would it follow what we have just learned. Which of the following errors will result in an overstatement of net income? Overstatement of net income. Overstatement of beginning inventory, let us see. Overstatement of beginning inventory results in lower net income. So this is not the right option. Not a right option. Incorrect. Overstatement of ending inventory. That makes sense. When the ending inventory is overstated, the closing stock is overstated, that will understate CGS because you will deduct a larger figure of closing stock from CGS. CGS will be understated. A lower CGS means you will have a higher gross profit. Higher gross profit will feed into higher net income, and that is our right option. So your net income would be higher if your ending inventory is overstated. So that makes a B to be the correct option. Then we have another question. An internal auditor performs an analytical procedure to compare the gross margins of various divisional operations with those of other divisions and with the individual divisions' performance in the previous year. What he's doing, let's say you have four divisions, A, B, C, D. You're comparing their results with each other, and you're also comparing their results with the previous period, A dash, C dash, B dash, and D dash. Right? So you're comparing their results with each other and as well as their result with the previous period. Okay. So what he has identified, the internal auditor notes a significant increase in the gross margin at one of the division. One division shows artificially, or not artificially, but a significantly higher gross profit than the other division. Now, this is surprising because when the cost structure is same, when the inputs are the same firm, how can have one division higher gross margin than the other? The internal auditor does some preliminary investigation, some beginning or some basic investigation, and also notes that there were no changes in products. Products were the same, production methods were the same, or the divisional management, even the management was the same. So what happened when every division is showing similar gross margin? Why one division has a significantly higher gross margin? The most likely cause of the increase in gross margin. Why did the gross margin increase? Let us see which of these could be the plausible reason. An increase in the number of competitors selling similar products. fine. If the competitors are selling similar products, then it will result in my net profit. My gross margin should stay the same. It doesn't affect my gross margin because my gross margin is the difference between sales and cost of goods sold. It has nothing to do with my competitors. Margin should stay the same. A decrease in the number of suppliers for the material used in manufacturing the product. So even if there is less material available, you will produce less, but your margin shouldn't be affected by this. Right? Look at this. An overstatement of the year-end inventory. Yes, when the closing stock is overstated, this closing stock is a deduction from CGS. Talha, you are absolutely right. So your CGS would be lowered. Having a lower CGS means your gross profit would be higher, and that means your net income would be higher. And this is the reason why you have a significantly higher gross margin in one of the divisions, right? So, gentlemen, that covers your inventory fundamentals, the basic of inventory. Now we have the next topic, inventory cost flow. This is the same we have just done because we need it here. So there are 4 methods in your inventory cost flow assumptions: FIFO, weighted average, LIFO, and average cost method. These are the 4 methods: specific identification, FIFO, LIFO, and weighted average. Let us discuss these one by one. We have just discussed that the goods that we have available for sale, which basically is equal to the goods that were in the opening stock plus the goods bought. Remember, opening stock plus purchases gives you the goods available for sale, right? Out of these, what we sell becomes part of CGS, and what still remains with us is the ending inventory. Now, the problem is, how do we value the ending inventory? Because there might be many, many units, thousands of units, when the prices are fluctuating. So how are we going to value the ending inventory? Because the prices are fluctuating and goods are almost similar. How do we value the ending inventory? We cannot distinguish thousands of items. So how do we value this? So let us discuss these methods one by one. The first method is specific identification. This method is only suitable when the items are so distinct. Look at this. A Ferrari is a totally distinct item from these diamonds and a totally distinct from this house for sale. When the items are so distinct, when we can track their cost individually, like let's say if this item costs $6 million, the cost can be separately identified. It costs, let's say, $2 million, and this house costs $1 million. So I have separately identifiable products, and I can assign the specific cost to them. So in such method, there is not an issue for the firm because costs are assigned to individual products and CGS can be determined accordingly. Like if this is the cost, and if I sell this item at $10 million, so I can clearly see what is the profit on sale, $4 million. So when the goods are specific, easily identifiable, and cost can be attached to the items, the method we use is called the specific identification. Let's do a question to explain our point. Illustrated below is a perpetual inventory. Remember, perpetual inventory means where every sale and purchase is given separately. Please note down, perpetual inventory means when every sale and purchase is given separately. Look at this. This is your opening balance. This is the purchase. This is the sale, purchase, sale. So when every transaction is given separately, this is called perpetual inventory. Perpetual inventory table or perpetual inventory record. What are we required to do? Additional information, the entity had no beginning inventory. Yes, it shows up here. The items sold on 15th of March were purchased on January 12th. Now, this is an important piece of information because we are using specific identification. The item which we sold on 15th of March, these items, I should take the highlighter. These items, they were sold out of this inventory. So you can see they are specifically identifiable. These 300 items have come from these units, right? Then it further says, let me change the color of the highlighter to green. It says the items sold on 8th of July were purchased on 5th May. So these items we sold, they came from these. This is called specific identification. This is called specific identification because we have specifically identified the items of each sale and purchase. Let me change the color of the pointer. It has gone. Okay, now the cost of goods sold under the specific identification method is going to be. Now look at this. These 300 items that I've sold, they have come from these purchases at the rate of 2, right? Similarly, the items that I have sold on 8th of July, these 500 items, these items were purchased at 2.2. Since now I have specific price of each item sold, that's why it's called specific identification method, because the items sold 500 have a specific price, item sold at a specific price. So very good, all of you got it correct. So it's 300 times 2 and 500 times 2.2. It is 1700. This is called specific identification method, where we can trace every item sold with its cost. But this is not always true. Answer is correct, D. This is not always true, because when the goods are similar, they are all the same, but their prices are changing in the market, then how do we value the inventory? That could be a problem. So the choice of an inventory costing method is not based on the physical flow of the goods, rather the goods which are homogeneous, they are similar. So we simply use these 3 methods to value the closing stock and value the cost of goods sold. It's not that, remember, when we are using a last in first out, it doesn't mean that the goods have to physically follow the LIFO method. Subhan, this question is quite easily doable. This kind of question is expected. But I will tell you what kind of questions are not expected, especially perpetual calculation for LIFO and WIT and moving average, that are hard. They will be time consuming, so you might not be tested on such questions. So when you are using these LIFO, FIFO, weighted average, it's not that we mark certain items to be sold first and mark certain items to be sold later. It's just that the items, they may be old, they may be new. We value them at either the old rate or we value them at the new rate. So it's just for the valuation purpose. It is not that we mark goods which are older, which are new. So this is just, that's why it's called cost flow. It is not because of the physical flow of goods, just for the purpose of costing. So I will explain the idea. So let us first do the first in, first out. Under the first in, first out method, not the oldest goods, oldest costs. This is very important point. Most of you may have a little misunderstanding. Remember, the cost flow assumption is applicable on the cost, not the physical flow of goods. That is the reason I didn't write oldest items are sold first, latest items are in the ending inventory. No, oldest costs, the prior period cost, these costs are charged to your CGS. And the latest cost, the recent cost, these costs are used to value your inventory. That's why it's called first in, first. First out means first cost out, and the latest cost, it becomes the part of your ending inventory. Let us see how does it actually work. We have some numbers here for you. Now, gentlemen, this is the detail of your buying and selling over the period. You had a beginning inventory of 1,000 units, 5.25. So the value of the beginning stock is this. We purchased 500, then 300, then 250, and then 200 at these rates. And then this was the total value of the goods we bought. And during the period, if you add these all, you will get 2250. This is the goods available for sale. Remember, goods available for sale is the opening stock plus goods we bought. Out of these 2250, we sold 1050. 2250 less 1050 will give you 1200. This is the ending inventory. This is your ending inventory. Now we are going to value these. Inflation, yes, prices are rising. So there's an inflationary pressure on the items. Correct. So these are the goods available for sale. Out of these, we have sold 1050 goods, and what we didn't sell is 1200. Now, if you ask me what is the difference between this table and this table, this is the perpetual inventory card, which explicitly, clearly shows you when the items were bought, when sold, when bought, when sold. But this is not the perpetual one. This is not perpetual. Why? Because it only shows you the dates on which we bought these items at these rates, but it doesn't show that if we sold these 1050 items, when they were sold. So this is not a perpetual inventory card. So I will explain the idea of perpetual and periodic as we go along. So what we are required to do, we are required to calculate the ending inventory and the cost of goods sold under the FIFO method. That is the first in, first out. We have an input. Talha says 7,080 and Subhan has given us the CGS figure. Let us do it. All right, gentlemen. First in, first out. So if you have sold 1,050 items, they must have been sold from our oldest purchases. So it means if 1,050 items, the oldest cost should have been released first. Remaining 50, it should have been at the rate of 5.3. So multiplying these 1,000 into 5.25 plus 50 multiplied by 5.3. This gives us 5510, 5515. This is the cost of goods sold. And now we need to find the value of closing stock. So you can calculate from here. Out of these 500 units, 50 have been sold. Remaining units are 450. So what you're going to do, 450 multiplied by 5.3, 300 into 5.60, 250 into 5.8, and 200 into 5.9. So I'm going to do just that, 5.3 times 450 plus and plus. It gives me 6695. Absolutely, Ibrar, you're absolutely right. 6695, or you can calculate this less this. You're right, you can do this less this, but it's advisable to see how these individual items are added together to give you the ending inventory. So this is the ending inventory value 6695, and this is the cost of goods sold. If you compare these numbers, you're right here. 6695 is your value of your ending inventory, and the cost of goods sold is 5515. Right. So in most of the cases, Ibrar, answer, you're not given this. In many questions you will see. So that's why I recommended this approach, that you will keep the items separately and then you will calculate the value. Okay, so we got it that this is how we value. So this table, gentlemen, is not a perpetual inventory card. We simply took what we had, what we sold, and we just simply use the numbers and calculated value. The calculation I have done, I have done it at the end of the period. I have done it at the end of the period. I did not match transactions. I did not match when did I buy, when sell, when bought, when sold. Since I have done it at the end of the period, please remember this value of inventory is calculated using periodic. I calculated all these numbers at the end of the year, and I didn't match when did I buy, when did I sell. I just took all in one go. This is called the periodic method. What we do, and that's what you are going to be tested on exam. Subhan, this is where you are going to be tested. A question like this will come on exam. What will not come in exam is a question like this. Let's say there are just few transactions, or maybe a longer table. Here, if you have to calculate the value under FIFO, you will have to match each transaction. What was available, what was sold, each and every purchase and sale will have to be seen, and only then you will be able to calculate what is the value of CGS and what is the value of your ending inventory or the closing stock. Right? So remember, what I've done is the periodic method. I didn't see the dates. I simply saw what I had, what I sold, and what is the ending inventory, and use the numbers to calculate. It was simple one-step calculation, and that's what you're going to be tested. But doing them one by one, matching each purchase and sale, and then calculating, this is done in perpetual inventory valuation, and that is not tested in the exam because it is time consuming. It may take 5 or 8 minutes to do a single question. Like the same question, if done on perpetual basis, where we match every sale and purchase, and then you come up with the closing stock and CGS, that's time consuming. Right? I will do a couple of questions on perpetual also, so you can make a comparison between. And one important point you must also remember, FIFO method, if you are using periodic, you got 5515 as your value of closing stock, and I believe you got I think 6695. No, your closing stock had a value of 6695, and your cost of goods sold has a value of 5515. FIFO is the only method, only cost to assumption, if you apply periodic, just like I've done it, or if you go transaction by transaction, every purchase and sale is matched, and then we calculate the value. This is called perpetual. So whether you use periodic and perpetual, your FIFO will reveal the same results, 6695 for ending inventory and 5515. Please note this down. This is a very fine point. FIFO periodic that I've just done, and FIFO perpetual, that's a detailed working which I will do tomorrow. I will explain the perpetual method in detail. It's time consuming. So, and FIFO will give you the same numbers for ending work in for closing stock and CGS, whether it's periodic or perpetual, right? So right now, today we'll be doing periodic FIFO, periodic LIFO, periodic weighted average, and tomorrow, inshallah, we'll touch some questions involving perpetual for the sake of a comparison that you can make, that why these two methods are different. So we learned it that under first and first out, oldest costs are charged to CGS and recent costs are taken in the ending inventory. Remember, these are the costs that flow, cost flow. That's why it's called cost flow, not the physical goods. Now let's twist things around and let's, here we go. Here we go. This is a good question and it clearly says periodic. Periodic. Do I have sufficient time? I can do this question in periodic and perpetual both, and I can show you that you will have the same result whether you use periodic and perpetual. Let's do this. Let us ask our part 2 guys to wait. Let us do this under periodic and perpetual. So right question right at this point. So let us do under the periodic, which is examinable, which is easily doable in a couple of minutes, but perpetual takes time. It's much longer method. Okay, here we go. First in, first out cost flow assumption. An entity started in year 1 with 200 scented candles on hand at a cost of 3.5. Okay, this is the opening stock at this price. All right. These candles sell for 7 each. Okay, that's your selling price. All right. The following schedule represents the purchase and sales of the candles during year 1. All right. So this is the perpetual inventory card. You can see every transaction for sale and purchase is given separately. 150 units sold, 250 bought at this price. 100 sold, 200 bought, 200 sold, 350 bought, 300 sold, and then accordingly we will have closing stock. So let us first find out our closing stock using periodic. Under periodic, I am not concerned with the dates. I will just see what was available. I had 200 units in the opening stock. I purchased 250, 200, 350, which means the total available were 200 opening stock plus 250 plus 200 plus 350 gives me a total of 1,000 units. So the available goods were 1,000. Out of these, sold were 150, 100, 200, 300, which means I didn't even care about the date. Absolutely not. 150, 100, 200, 300. That gives me 750. So all I saw was what were the goods available for sale, opening stock plus purchases, and what were the goods units sold. So it means the closing stock is 250. Khalas. Now, since I'm using FIFO, first in, first out, the oldest cost, they go to CGS. The latest cost, the recent most cost, they will go to the closing stock. Now, what are the recent most cost? The recent most cost are $3 per unit, which means my closing stock should have a value of 250 multiplied by 3, that is 750. So this is the value of the closing stock using periodic. Let us find out the value of the CGS using periodic. Right now, how many units did I sell? I sold 750 units. Please look at this. These 750 units would have been sold from the oldest purchase. Out of these 750 units, 200 units were from the opening stock at the rate of cost of 3.5. Then we sold these 250 units at the rate of the cost of 3.30. Now we have a total of 450. Then we sold another 200 from this oldest bunch at the rate of 3.10, right? So how many we have? 200 plus 250 plus 200. I need just 100 more, and these 100 more will come from this at the rate of 3. Now, if you calculate these, all the oldest costs, they have been charged to cost of goods sold. So 200 multiplied by 3.5 plus 250 multiplied by 3.3 plus 200 multiplied by 3.1 plus 100 multiplied by 3. This gives me 2445. 200 multiplied by 3.5, 250 multiplied by 3.3, 200 multiplied by 3.1, and 100 multiplied by 3. My CGS comes out to be 2445. Okay. Now, we need to find the gross profit. The gross profit is the difference between your CGS and sales. Let us find out what is the figure for sales. We have sold 750 units and these units were sold at the rate of 7 each. So 750 multiplied by 7, that is 5250, right? 5250 is the sales, 2445 is the cost of sales. So sales versus cost of sales gives you 2805. So this 2805 is your gross profit, right? So 2805 is your gross profit, and that's your answer, right? Why did it take long? Because we calculated the ending value, we calculated the CGS, we calculated the gross profit, but we didn't bother about the dates. But when you're using perpetual, things are much more complex. Let me explain how. This is the method called periodic, where I didn't care about the dates. All I saw, what were the total goods available, what were sold, what were remaining, take the latest rate and value that. I didn't bother to see the transaction by transaction. Now, under the perpetual method, what you do, gentlemen, listen to me very carefully. When these 150 items were sold, they were sold from these items at a cost of 3.5, which means when out of these 200, 150 have been sold, the closing stock will be 50 units at the rate of 3.5, right? Because out of these 200, 150 have been sold, so I have 50 units at 3.5. Halas. Now I purchased 250 units at the rate of 3.3. Now my inventory has two types of items, 250 at the rate of 3.3 and 50 from the oldest purchase. This line is closed. Now, when I sell 100 units, these 100 units will go 50 from here and 50 from here, which means the closing will be 200 multiplied by 3.3. This is called perpetual, ladies and gentlemen. This is called perpetual, where I'm seeing every purchase, every sale, matching every purchase and every sale. This is time consuming. And historically, your examiner has been nice enough not to test you on this area, but it's my responsibility to teach you this method as well. So this transaction is over. Now, when I purchase these 200 units at 3.10, I have two types of stock. One, these 200 units at the rate of 3.3 and another 200 units at the rate of 3.10. Halas. Now, when I sell these 200 units, since I'm using FIFO, the oldest items are gone, which means the closing stock will entirely be these 200 units at the rate of 3.10. Now, when I purchase these 350 units again, these 350 units are at the rate of 3.00. Record updated. I have two types of inventory. And when I sell these 300 units, they will be sold from 200 from this and 100 from this. Thereby, I am left with only 250 units at the rate of 3. And that is the reason, gentlemen, you get $750, which was the same as per your FIFO periodic. So remember, FIFO periodic, FIFO perpetual, they give you absolutely the same CGS. They give you the same closing stock. They give you the same gross profit, because first and first out is the logical flow, the way costs move. That is why FIFO perpetual and FIFO periodic, they will give you the same CGS, same cost of sales, and same gross profit. And that's what we have just proved. The real difference you will understand well when we will do a similar question. Yes, we will do a similar question. Maybe we'll have it next. I will select a good question like this one. We will do this under LIFO. We will do the same question under LIFO perpetual. You will see that LIFO periodic will have different gross profit. It will have different CGS. It will have different closing stock. And LIFO perpetual will have different numbers. So we are going to do these two tomorrow, LIFO periodic and LIFO perpetual, inshallah. So that's the middle of your cost flow assumptions. Tomorrow we will, inshallah, wind up this, and you will wind up your entire unit, inshallah, by tomorrow. So by the time you'll come on Monday, we'll start unit 3. So please, whatever we have done, go through them well. Tomorrow we are going to do LIFO periodic and LIFO perpetual, as well as the weighted average, plus the LCM rule, which is a very important examinable area. So guys, that's all for today for part 1. I'll see you guys tomorrow with this specific point onward, inshallah. Ji, gentlemen, welcome. See you guys tomorrow, inshallah. Allah Hafiz. Good night. Ji, walaikum assalam.